Hi, hello Year 12, and welcome to, I guess this is the first of hopefully maybe a few videos for Year 12 Business Studies. So today's video is essentially aimed at those who were not here for we started finance in week 10. Now, I understand that some of you decided to start your holiday early, and I get it, that's fine. So if that was one of you, or if you didn't understand a few things and want to refresh your mind, it is a good idea to follow along. Okay, so what we're going through is the role of finance, but we are also incorporating um, the objectives and some key financial ratios. Now, these are essentially from the processes section of the syllabus, but it's better that you do understand which formulas, which ratios are linked to which objective. Okay, so we have essentially four key objectives with the finance syllabus, so we'll go through those today as well. But without further ado, let's get started. So, core structure, you have your role, um, you have your influences, you have processes and strategies. Now, hopefully you've had a read of influences then, not too difficult, but we will go through them in class. Okay, now the role is quite self-explanatory. Why do we have finance? What is our goal in finance? What is finance in and of itself? And most of you would probably say it's about money. Okay, so what is the role of money in a business? And then lastly, we'll go through strategies as to how to achieve our objectives, how to have a business that has good profitability, has good solvency, liquidity, and is efficient with its money. Okay, so we'll get through that down the course before we hit operations and your excursion to the ice cream factory. All right, so first things first, a role of finance. And here we do need to know two key distinctions, and this is essentially page 10 of your booklet. If you weren't here in the last week, that is available on Google Classroom. But we'll have a look here. Financial management, we have two key parts. We've got objectives and we have strategic plans. Okay? And these are two distinct parts of a business. What we have as a strategic plan is where we want our business to be, and it's not a short-term thing, it's 5 to 10 years. So if you think about a small business, let's pick on Jay again. So Onion, where do they want to be in 5 to 10 years? Do they want to grow and expand, or do they want to stay where they are, continue operating, maybe look at broadening their offerings? So they might diversify, they might look at other foods. Who knows, okay? We've got different sorts of expansion. Or do they want to grow the business? These are all strategic plans, and there are specific financial strategic plans as well in terms of profitability. How much return on investment do people want? Now, to really achieve our strategic plan, we have objectives that are within our strategic plan. These are essentially our goals, okay? You all have goals, you set your HSC goals, and these are more short-term things that we can work on. So maybe your next goal is to score over 80 in your business studies exam. Now those goals are part of some smaller objectives part of it as well. Okay? So that is pretty a self-explanatory thing. It's the same thing when we do HR, same thing when we do marketing, same thing when we do operations. So you'll see that here, your strategic plan. Number one is where are you now? Okay? Second part is what do you want to achieve? And the third part is our means to achieve it. So this is probably the best diagram for you to really understand it. So here, here, these are our long term. Okay? How are you going to do it? And we have certain areas. So the four key okay, so if you look on page 11 of your booklet, you'll see this diagram that I have on the screen right now. Essentially what we're looking at is where we situate the strategic plan and finance as part of it. So the strategic plan here is essentially the big set of goals. Okay, how we want to expand, what we want to provide, where we want to be, what we want to achieve. But you do need to focus on number 3. How are we going to do it? And these are where our goals are embedded. Okay, they could be operational goals, marketing goals, human resource goals, but we're specifically looking at financial goals. Okay, and these goals, objectives, and operational plans are all going to relate to the objectives we're going to go through as part of what a business wants as part of its finance. Okay, so we got to understand this is long term, this is short term. Now you might be wondering what sort of goals we're thinking as a business. So I'm just going to put a few of these over here. Okay, so we're going to think about how we get our finance. So do we borrow from a bank? Do we use our own owner's equity? These are all sort of things you learn in year 11. Okay? Oh, shut up, guys. Then we're going to think about how are we going to look at our cash flow? How are we going to look at our debts? Okay? How are we going to think about how quickly we get our money? And we're going to look at how we're going to distribute. That might be a good idea as well. We're going to start with profitability. And for business and business studies, this is the be all and end all for a business. This is where we start, okay? And that is the main objective. It's the first goal of a business. And we can do that in 2 ways. We can either increase sales or reduce costs. So we've gone through this countless times through the prelim course. And we all understand that businesses will always try to increase profitability. That's what they want. They want their money, okay? And what you can do is we can try to look at methods to maintain a long-term sustainable competitive advantage. Now, to really look at profitability in terms of ratios, we have 2 key equations. And this is our net profit and gross profit. Okay, now you will know these. These come from our income statement. That is where our data will come from. You will need to interpret the income statement. Okay, and from these we have our ratios. Now, ratios in business studies is used for the finance part only, and this is the most maths there is. You'll need to be able to interpret financial statements and develop a ratio and interpret that ratio. So it's best that you actually refer to a worksheet I have on Google Classroom. So it looks a little bit like this, okay? And we're going to look at different ratios in terms of different objectives. So we're looking at the first one, which is profitability. We have our gross profit ratio, net profit ratio, and return on equity ratio. I do encourage you to fill this out as we go. So put the formula into the worksheet, okay? You also have this in your booklet as well, though some of the ratios are missing. So we know profitability is our first goal, it's our main goal for business. But the means to achieve it, we have three separate equations. The first one is our gross profit ratio. So I should say profit somewhere. Our gross profit ratio, and this is really looking at the profits our profits relative to our sales in terms of our inputs, in terms of our stock. And to be honest, this is not particularly useful for many businesses, though it might give you an idea about your suppliers and your the cost of your stock. So if you're a restaurant and you're producing, say, pho, if your costs are too high in terms of your noodles, your meatballs, your mint, you will be able to find that out through your gross profit ratio, okay? Now, for gross profit ratio and net profit ratio, higher is better. Okay, so we want more profit relative to our sales. That's our gross profit. Net profit is a more useful tool for most businesses. Okay, so this really represents a return on investment in terms of how much they're putting in and what they're getting back for their overall operating expenses. This will include not only COGS, so our stock, but also our expenses. Okay, so this is a more accurate representation on how profitable a business is. Like, you could have a good gross profit ratio. However, if you have high rent, high wages, that will not be reflected until you look at the net profit ratio, and that could be a very negative outcome. Okay, so that is our first one. Then we have our return on equity ratio. Now this one is really looking at our profits, but looking at your equity, the money you actually put into the business, and the return on investment, essentially. So this does require you to look at the balance sheet, and income statement. And like the others, higher is better. Okay, so if we have more profit relative to how much we put in terms of our investment, then that is a better outcome for the business. Okay, so that's profitability. First one done. Okay, we're going to move on now. We've got an example actually. So what we have here is we can look at our gross profit and our net profit. Okay, so here we got our revenue is 100,000. To get our gross profit, we got to look at our COGS. 100,000 minus 80 equals 20,000. And we put it into our equation. Okay, so gross profit 20,000. Our sales are 100,000, and we get a equation of 20%, okay? Alternatively, we have our net profit ratio, and this will give us a better idea of where our business is because our operating expenses are often very high, especially in Australia, okay? Part of the reason why many businesses offshore outsource to overseas. So we've got our expenses here, and that equals 5,000. Okay, and to calculate our net profit, it is our equals gross minus expenses 20 equals 15,000. That will go up there. Our sales are still up there, and we get an outcome of 15%. So what this really means is that for every $1 going into the business, it keeps 15 cents. Or 15 cents is made as profit. Okay, so a business will not want a negative because that means they're hemorrhaging and losing money, but they're making 15 cents for every dollar. Now, many businesses might want more than that, but 15% is not too bad. Here, our gross sales. It's 20% of every dollar you put into a product, you get 20% back. So often you might be talking to your parents, and well, this is my example, and my parents complain eating out is too much. Okay, a bowl of pho costs $12, but the cost might only be $1, $2, and this is where we get our equation in terms of our gross profit. It doesn't factor in our other expenses. Okay, so we're going to move on from this. And we're going to look at our second objective, that's growth. And that's how we can grow our business. Now, this is actually a revision from year 11. There's no equation, there's no ratio for this. So it really is quite simple. This diagram I've stolen from year 11, where we did business growth and decline. And that growth period of a business, they look to expand. So many businesses seek to expand to grow bigger. They might diversify their product, okay? And they might integrate horizontally. Okay, so if you're a bakery, I might take over other businesses. Okay, I might look at merging, I might look at acquiring, mergers and acquisitions. Or I can expand, I can diversify, okay? And we can go backwards along the supply chain. So if you're a bakery, you might look at the farm instead. Or I might diversify and look at something completely different. Alternatively, I can go forward. And where does my end product lead to? So I might acquire the shop if I'm a bakery. Okay, now these growth has many different factors behind it. We can look at growing the business in terms of our value, our sales, our profits, okay, our asset structures. I might have more machinery in my business now, so more machines. I can operate more efficiently. Okay, I might grow in terms of market share, 15% to 20% in 2 years. Okay, these are all growth objectives, and there's different methods behind it. Sales, size, assets, acquisitions, mergers. This is the simplest of our financial objectives. Then we have our efficiency, and this is our third objective. And there's two ratios we need to use. Okay, now the first one, well, what this really means is how a business can be more efficient, reduce costs, increase profit. In this case, it's reduce costs, increase output. Essentially, it's to be more profitable. If a business is more profitable, its expenses ratio will improve. Okay, so what we have here is our expenses ratio. It's our total expenses over our sales. Now, this really represents how efficient the business is in getting more revenue for what the existing stock can produce, or reducing costs. So your wages might decrease, get people to work harder, you have less staff, and maintain the same amount of output. Okay, so that is our two ways we can really be efficient. In this case, a lower ratio represents a more efficient business. So that is how efficient in terms of sales. But there's another way we can look at efficiency. And this one is a little bit more abstract and different, but it's our accounts receivable turnover ratio. So that's how long it takes for us to get our money back. Okay, so often businesses don't receive the money straight away when they sell something. You put it on an account and you have different credit policies, and essentially you're in debt for that time. Someone owes you, you've given them the product, and it's based off goodwill often. Okay, but it's an important part for a business to get its money back as soon as possible, because you could be using that money for different purposes. You could be saving it, you can be investing it, you can return that to your shareholders. Okay, so that's why we have the accounts receivable turnover ratio. And the way we do it is 365 divided by sales over accounts receivable. Essentially, this represents how long it takes to get your money back. Now, what you won't really see is the 365 won't be provided in the reference material, but you do need to factor in how many days the business takes to get its money back. Okay, so our next objective is liquidity. Now, liquidity means money, having the ability to turn our assets into hard money, cash, in a very short time frame. And this is really related to our current assets. Okay, so our current assets can be found in our balance sheet, and essentially this is relating to how we can convert our current assets into cash to service our different liabilities. Okay, so we'll use liabilities and the terms financial obligations almost interchangeably, but essentially what we need to know is that a business needs to be able to pay off its debt quickly. And if you aren't able to pay off your debt, that could lead to a debt trap where you're borrowing more money to pay more debt, and then that will continue and continue and continue where you incur interest. Okay, so a business really wants to be able to pay off its debt quickly, but it needs a means to do so. And you need enough current assets, i.e. cash, accounts receivable, stock that you can sell quickly. Remember, this is all current assets under 12 months. Okay, so with all these things here, we can sell, turn into cash. And with this cash, we are able to pay off our debts. Okay, we have liabilities that we have that need to be paid off in the short term. Now, this is all about liquidity, and generally we have a 2-to-1 ratio is accepted. I need double the amount in assets to my liquidity. So if I have if I have 10,000 in debt, okay, I would ideally want 20,000 in current assets to pay off my current liabilities. So this would be my credit cards, my accounts payable, maybe I have debentures, all these short-term debts I need to pay off with my short-term assets. Okay, now it's bad financial management if you don't have the amount of money required. Okay, so I think we have an example, maybe not. Nope. Okay, we do have a few equations. So liquidity, we have essentially, there's one main financial ratio, and that is the current ratio or liquidity ratio, assets over liabilities. And you want 2 to 1. What we also have is other ratios. So we have our working capital ratio, which is really just a ratio of assets to liabilities, and net working capital. Okay, so these I'll leave there for you to have a look at, but it's not necessarily required. We have our key ratios that you see inside that worksheet. Now, okay, so we do have a bit of practice. Okay, so we're going to try to look at the liquidity ratio for this business. And we got to remember our liquidity ratio is current assets over current liabilities. Okay, so we got to look at our current assets, which is 26,000, over our current liabilities, which is 8,500. So some quick math, someone, equals 3.06. Okay, so for this is actually quite a good liquidity ratio. Okay, the business is able to liquidify itself quite quickly. We can get money to pay off what we owe in a very short time span. So our overdrafts, our accounts payable, our credit cards, our different expenses can be paid off in quite a short time span because we have the cash available. We have the accounts receivable, which should be paid. That's depending on your accounts receivable turnover ratio. Our prepaid expenses are already done. We have 10,000 in stock, which we can hopefully sell within the next 12 months. Okay. Now we have the other equations. So working capital. Working capital is essentially just a ratio in and of itself. So the assets so we have 26,000, 8,500. That is our ratio. We can simplify that. Okay, so it's 3.06 to 1. And our net working capital is how much we have to work with. Okay, so for this, it's our current assets minus current liabilities. So basically sub it in, 26,000 minus 8,500. That is how much we have available for us to work with after we've serviced our debts. Because it's net, it's what we have left. That's the working capital, what we have left, what we can do with our money. So hopefully this is quite simple for you. Okay, our last of the financial ratios and our last of our objectives, this is solvency. And essentially what it will show is how much we're borrowing relative to how much we actually put our own equity or our own internal source of finance into a business. Okay, so that is what we call gearing. How we gear a business is how much we put in rather than how much we borrow. And there's pros and cons in terms of borrowing more or putting more money. Obviously, if you are putting too much money of your own into the business, that could be negative because you could have been using that money on other investments. But conversely, if you're borrowing too much, you might not be able to pay it back. You'll incur lots of interest. So there's pros and cons on both. We went through that in the prelim course. Okay, but here we go to talk about solvency. And this is a key element in terms of how we really pay for all our assets. Okay, so remember our assets in our balance sheet, and then this is our liabilities plus our owner's equity. And solvency is really a ratio of liabilities. So essentially a ratio of these two. Okay? How much do we borrow? How much do we put in of our own? And it is important because we need to be able to understand how we are able to use our owner's equity to pay for our liabilities. Okay? Now, we use our debt to equity ratio to do this. And essentially, this is going to show how much we really put in debt to how much we put in of our own internal sources. A higher ratio means less solvent the firm is. So if we have too much liabilities, it's bad, okay? Because we might not be able to pay with that equity. So the higher the ratio, i.e. the more liabilities, means less solvent. We might not be able to trade when we're insolvent. Well, obviously you wouldn't. That's illegal in Australia. Okay, so that should be it. Now there are a few questions you're going to be doing for homework as well. And I'm going to provide a separate video for us to go through all of these together. Okay, so have a look onto that on Google Classroom and hopefully we can get through these efficiently.